didn't want to see her or ask to see her or anything? And so that initial time, did she see you put Shanann in the truck? So she was kind of following you? Okay. So she followed you and you put Shanann in the truck. Okay. And then what?
Cece wasn't up yet. She was just in her room. She was getting ready to get out of her bed. And then they were just walking around the house. I was put my lunchbox and stuff in the truck, and then grabbed the kids and I put them in the bench seat in the back.
Okay. And so Shanann, is she kind of on the floor in the back? And they're just on the bench. Okay. And both alive at that point. Okay. Is there any reason you would feel uncomfortable to tell me that they were not alive at that point?
They were.
Okay.
It wasn't a video or anything?
It's hard to...
Losing time, I'm fading fast. I just wanna make it last. Try to let go of the past. I close my eyes, embrace the blast. Sleepless nights and headaches stack. Restlessness to hell and back. What's my purpose? What do I grab? A slippery surface, a heart attack. And sometimes you just gotta believe there's something that'll give you relief.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. This particular episode I really want to make as short as possible, although there's a lot to say about it and I've written a lot, certainly in my books. I certainly feel that my psychological assessments in my true crime narratives are one of my strong points, but I don't like to touch on it lightly, which is why I don't really like doing what I'm about to do now, because it requires evidence and anchoring things in statements and in backstory and in someone's identity and in what friends say and all that kind of thing. But be that as it may, I want to quickly run through the myth. I've already touched on the myth of Chris Watts' narcissism. I now want to just quickly touch on the myth of his supposed sociopathy. I'm very aware that probably most people think that he is either a narcissist or a sociopath, and so I'm completely outnumbered in this regard, and that's fine. I'm not very happy about it. I'm not very happy that so many people are deluded, but can I tell you something? There's a reason why we live in the society we live in. People have lost the ability to discern. People have lost the ability to think rationally about ordinary things and even obvious things. And that's why I sort of extended the challenge to say, it's more than a year later. Do you know what Chris Watts actually is? Do you know what kind of person he is? And if we run through the traits of the sociopath, if you sort of gloss over it, all of them seem to match. Did Chris Watts lack empathy? Yes, he did. Did he have difficulty with relationships? Yes, he did. He was struggling with Shanann, he was struggling with Kissinger. Was he manipulative? Yes, he was. Was he deceitful? Yes, he was. Was he irresponsible to commit murder? Yes, he was. Was he impulsive in committing murder? Yes, he was. Right? And so it just seems you can give him 10 out of 10 for each of those traits. Yes, he absolutely is a sociopath. But we're now going to quickly go through all 6 of those traits. And these are by no means exhaustive traits, and this is by no means a very cogent way of doing this. But I just want to do it very quickly and very accessibly, if that's the right term. So when we go through them one by one, we just think of them in a different way, and there are people who have made up their minds. If you're one of them, please don't stay on this channel. Go to the communities that utterly believe this stuff and stay there. If you're someone with an open mind, and if you're someone capable of thinking, if you're someone capable of rational thought, if you're someone capable of thinking logically, scientifically, evidence-based thinking, someone who's sensitive and also open and flexible, then this is probably something you do want to hear. So if we go through these traits of a sociopath, the first one is a lack of empathy. Now, the difference between someone who knows true crime and somebody who doesn't, the difference between someone who's involved in psychology and someone who knows criminal psychology, is that there's a vast difference between a lack of empathy in terms of the commission of a crime and then that person's identity. And what I'm trying to say is, obviously when you're committing a crime, you are not caring about what you're doing to somebody else, obviously. But to extend this lack of empathy in a general way, so in other words, beyond the crime, to say this person generally lacked empathy. And as a general rule, this person didn't really care about other people. As a general rule, this person didn't really think about other people's feelings or anything like that. Is that generally true? And the lack of empathy is the most well-known, arguably the most well-known sign of a sociopath. When you look at Chris Watts and we go beyond the crime scene, we say, did he lack empathy towards his children? Well, that seems to be an obvious answer, because and ideally one would want to go and look at photos and look at Facebook posts and that kind of thing, to get the sense, not from what I'm saying or what you think or what anyone else is saying, but from Chris Watts himself. What is he actually demonstrating? And so you often see him exercising with the children on his shoulders, running around the children, but doing things in a way where he's coming to the level of the children. He's in the space that they are in, and he's seems to be quite a doting father. Now, you can criticize that all you like and say, well, actually he wasn't, but you can then just as well go to any other father and say, how many other fathers were as caring and affectionate towards his children as Chris Watts was prior to the crime? It's an open question. If you also look at how Chris was to his wife in terms of his marriage, she would ask him to do things, he would do it. You might not say that is empathy, but if Shanann was sick, didn't Watts let her lie on his lap for 2 or 3 hours, and this made her fall in love with him? And so there are many instances like that we can name, but all I'm saying is, if you isolate the lack of empathy to the Sermon on the Porch and the circumstances of the crime, that is looking at a little fragment and seeing what you want to see. You need to link that up to Chris Watts prior to the crime and Chris Watts after the crime. And can you see that lack of empathy doesn't really extend that far? He does seem to be an empathetic person. He did care about his dog, for example. Then we go to number 2, difficulty with relationships. One could argue that he did have difficulty. He had difficulty having a relationship with his daughters. He had difficulty forming a relationship with his unborn son. He had a difficulty getting his relationship with Kissinger underway. He didn't like to, he didn't have a lot of friends or whatever it is. But actually, if you look at that beyond the circumstances of the crime, he was very well liked. His colleagues liked him. They had a sort of a nickname for him, Rain Man. When they saw him at the site that day, they sort of joked because he wasn't dressed as well as he normally was. He had some fairly good relationships with the friends that he did have. He jogged with Nick Thayer. He went to a birthday party with Jeremy Lindstrom, who was a friend from work, ex-colleague from work. It seemed that he didn't have problems with relationships. The Watts family often had people over, and they sort of had, I wouldn't say parties, but they sort of had events at their home, and Chris Watts was there. It wasn't as though he had difficulty with relationships. The fact is that he was in a relationship, an extramarital relationship, and his mistress was really pursuing him. So was he really having difficulty with that, or was she having difficulty? You know, it seemed as though she was pursuing him, and it was actually going very, very well in terms of the dynamics of the romantic relationship, irrespective of the events around that. He also had good relations with his parents-in-law, with the Ruseks, whereas Shanann didn't have the same kind of good relations with his parents, right? Then you go into the manipulative aspect, and you can say Chris Watts is very manipulative. Well, if he was so manipulative, why was he caught so quickly? Why did he give over to the plea deal as quickly as he did? I think there's some substance in this, in that he's come up with 3 bogus confessions, and he, in the way that he tried to dispose of the bodies of his family, he was ashamed, and so he was trying to manipulate people and mislead them. But as manipulators go, he seems a bit less manipulative than most. If you look at his relationship with Kissinger, he seemed kind of besotted with her in a sincere way, in a pathetic way, and in a horrible way, as it turned out. But I don't think he was very manipulative of her. I think one could argue that Kissinger and Shanann were more manipulative of him than he was of them. Certainly right towards the end, when he's engaged in the affair, I think he was quite manipulative of Shanann. But he was also quite open, saying to her he's not sure what he's thinking about, and so he's not trying to manipulate her. He was trying to say, well, look, I'm trying to fix this, I'm not sure what's going on, and so on. One can apply the same thing in terms of the deceitfulness. He was relatively honest with Shanann. He was relatively honest, saying he's scared to death having this child. But one thing that does seem to be the case is he does seem to be capable of dishonesty more than average. So in that particular area, he seems comfortable with his deceitfulness. I just want to expand this aspect, the deceitfulness, to, if you look at Kissinger and you look at Shanann, you look at what Shanann did for a living, and you look at Kissinger, and I realize this will upset some people and be controversial, but Kissinger was deceitful too in engaging in an affair with him, and in her interrogation she wasn't completely honest. Again, if you look at Shanann's job, selling these powders and talking about how her family was thriving, meanwhile what was actually going on, it's an unkind word to use, but it certainly wasn't sincere, honest, or true. And so what was it then? Wasn't it deceitful? Then we take number 5, irresponsible. Chris Watts was a regular worker. He in a way was the main breadwinner at home. The house was on his name, right? Not on Shanann's name, it was on his name. It was sort of up to him to pay the mortgage. He ultimately took responsibility for the crime that he committed by agreeing to the plea deal, and by all accounts it looks like he did so very, very early on. As early as the 26th of August it looks like he was doing that. Another thing is the confession that he gave. As much as he was lying and deceitful in it, he admitted that his family had died, and he also admitted, in other words, took responsibility that he had killed Shanann. Even if his reasons were wrong, he took responsibility. And that's very quickly in the thing. Some murderers never take responsibility through the course of their entire lives. One could argue that Chris Watts was generally irresponsible. Was he irresponsible with his children? Was he irresponsible having the affair? Yes, he was. Was he irresponsible with money? And that's where one could make a counter argument and say perhaps he was more responsible with money than Shanann was. Perhaps he was more diligent with his savings and with his income than Shanann was, and that was why it was upsetting to him that she was in control of the finances and the finances were going down the drain. If you want to make a counter argument and say no, he was part of the financial problem, that argument I can accept. I'm just saying, to say that he was generally irresponsible and that this plays into him being a sociopath, I'm not sure if that's correct. And then the impulsivity, that aspect also just seems completely off. Chris Watts committed a premeditated murder. The nature of the crime isn't impulsive. The nature of the crime, and I'm saying this within the context of committing a murder, it was also not irresponsible. The murder itself, obviously, in terms of taking innocent lives, was irresponsible, was horrendous and all that kind of thing. But in terms of the murderer committing the crime and then cleaning up after himself, it's a very uncomfortable line of reasoning I'm taking here. But what I'm trying to get at is the shame he's feeling is a way of taking responsibility for what he's done. In other words, he knows what he's done. He knows it's irresponsible, but he's taking steps to cover it up. And I think that does play into the irresponsible aspect to some extent. You know, the whole idea of cleaning and doing laundry doesn't strike me as someone who has disregard for other people or for his own responsibilities. Shanann thought he was a good dad. She said that. She thought he was a good husband. So that seems to suggest that he was quite a responsible guy. In terms of impulsivity, you know, he wasn't on social media all the time. He's not a reactive kind of guy. When he was pushed to confess, he didn't do it impulsively. It took him some time to do it. I'm not saying he's not impulsive at all. I'm just saying, you know, on a spectrum, I don't think he's the most impulsive person. I don't think the crime he committed was in a rage or in a snapping way. I would also say that Shanann, I think, is a more impulsive person than he is. You know, her going to North Carolina, that's fairly impulsive. Doing the Facebook Live stuff is impulsive. Going on social media is impulsive. I think Watts is becoming more impulsive, irresponsible, deceitful, manipulative, and lacking empathy as he got closer to committing the crime. That's all true. And I would also describe the crime itself as sociopathic. So I would say what he did lacked empathy. What he did showed he had difficulty with his relationship. What he did was manipulative, deceitful, irresponsible, and impulsive. Yes, the crime was sociopathic, but is Chris Watts a sociopath? No. You could argue that by virtue of him committing this crime, doesn't that make him a sociopath? I would argue that it doesn't, in the same way that if you a certain kind of person and then something happens to you, that doesn't then define you for the rest of your life, although it could. And then just to touch quickly on the 10 signs of a narcissistic sociopath, which I think is what the live abuse free person was talking about. I think she's saying that Chris Watts is a narcissistic sociopath. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so she's saying, you know, what he was doing was love bombing, disappearing act, rapid commitment, hot and cold, gaslighting, punishments, isolation, sacrifice, sarcasm, complexity. If you look at those, was Chris Watts love bombing his mistress? Well, he sent her a couple of cards. Did he do a disappearing act? Well, he actually did a reappearing act in North Carolina. He pitched up to his family even though he wasn't very happy to be there. Rapid commitment, well, one could say the same thing about Shanann and Kessinger in terms of Chris Watts. He didn't have a rapid commitment to the birth of his child, although one could say he too rapidly committed to the birth of the third child. He certainly did seem to show a rapid commitment to Kessinger, but it certainly wasn't overnight. 6 weeks isn't that rapid. I mean, some people get into relationships far quicker than that. Hot and cold, mean and sweet. I don't know. I think he was quite consistent with Shanann. He wasn't hot and cold with her. He did become colder, but I don't think on a daily basis he was hot and cold. I think he was generally cool, like a cool cucumber. I think he was also cool to Kissinger. I think he's the kind of personality that's cool, not a hot and cold type. I think Shanann and Kissinger are more hot and cold types. Punishment, sarcasm, and all that. I don't think Chris Watts was the sarcastic type either. You just don't get that in the comments that he makes to the police. You get that more with Patrick Frazee. Seems to be more of the sarcastic type and hot and cold and all that kind of thing. So I don't think these apply either. And that's my take on it. If you've got any thoughts, please leave a comment. I have touched on, if he's not a sociopath, if he's not a narcissist, what is he? I have touched on that, but I'm not going to do that here. Anyway, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts and to see if I've shifted your thoughts in any way on this particular case. As I've said, I've touched on it very lightly and very quickly. It does deserve to be anchored and sort of related to statements and to patterns of behavior. And speaking in this way, glossing through it isn't the way to do it. But it's also the way that these other YouTube people have done it. You don't touch on it, you don't root it in the actual narrative enough. And I haven't done that either, but just because I don't want to sit here for an hour. My books have done that. If you're interested in the psychology that I uncover in the books, please go and download the Two-Face series and check them out. Those are grounded in the patterns of behavior, and it's very well researched. The case is very clearly made. In any event, thank you for listening.